2007-8, and we have seen that this program has provided a real lifeboat to save vultures from extinction. You all are aware that how diclofenac and that kind of medicines have created havoc to the vulture population, and now there are clear-cut signals of population recovery in different pockets of the country. Next, please. So CZA is treating all critically endangered resident Gyps species in its priority list. In fact, the Government of India, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, under the ongoing scheme, centrally sponsored scheme of integrated development of wildlife habitat, they have also given priority to this endangered species, vultures, and they provide funding support under that scheme for in-situ conservation of vultures in the country. Other than this, the CZA provides technical support and funding support for vulture conservation in captivity. So vulture conservation breeding Pinjore has been identified. It is, as you all are aware, Dr. Vibhu Prakash and his team, they are managing this. And this is playing a role of coordinating zoos and among different conservation breeding centers. Next slide. So since 2007-8, a lot of work has been done, and we have successful example in Pinjore. And based on that experience, a couple of advisories have been issued, manuals have been prepared, and CZA is continuously trying to organize between all these conservation centers, exchange of best practices and how. But unfortunately, some centers, next slide, some centers are doing population vultures in captivity. You can see that Pinjore, Baksa, and to some extent Rani, they are doing very well. In fact, Pinjore is outstanding. But some centers like Junagadh, Hyderabad, the performance is not that good. So we need to brainstorm, we need to analyze why they are successful in some centers and why not in other centers. And maybe from Pinjore, we need to transfer the best practices to all other these centers. Next slide, please. So the way forward, I think we need more such kind of workshops so that all vulture conservation breeding centers, they come to the same level. The genetic diversity of founder population should be determined. That's very important, because if the population in any conservation breeding center, there's no exchange of birds between two centers or other centers, there will be inbreeding, depression, inbreeding problem. So for that, we need to study the genetic diversity, and birds should be shifted. I think right now, hardly any exchange is taking place. We need to give emphasis to exchange of birds from one center to another. Siblings should be shifted to the centers within the known distribution range of states. And we have seen that 25 pairs of parent stock, 25 pairs of F1 generation should be at least kept in each center. And we think that this is the right time when progenies of F1 generation could be released in the wild. Already some efforts have been made at Rajabhat, vultures have been released in the wild after tagging, and Pinjore also. But I think the time has come, from this ex-situ to in-situ conservation and relation linkage has to be established more. So with these words, I conclude my presentation, and I'm sure that we have two eminent speakers and experts in the field of vulture conservation, Dr. Vibhu Prakash and Chris. I think all the participants will benefit from their experience and knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir, for the overview and to set the tone. And we will get back to you, time permitting, for questions. Now I welcome Dr. Christopher G.R. Bowden, who is currently serving as the Globally Threatened Species Officer for the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, RSPB, and his primary role since 2004 has been coordinating the Asian Vulture Program in South Asia. He is currently program manager for SAVE, which is Saving Asia's Vultures from Extinction, a consortium of regional and international organizations committed to the conservation of vultures in South Asia. Chris is also the co-chair of the IUCN Vulture Specialist Group since its formation in 2011. Dr. Chris has focused on threatened and critically endangered species for all of his career and was based in Morocco for 7 years in 90s, researching and coordinating efforts for the northern bald ibis. Over the past 30 plus years, he has mainly been into field-based studies in Africa, Asia, UK, and the Caribbean, and has primarily focused on breeding ecology and behaviors in bird species, including vultures. So over to you, sir. Chris, we cannot hear you. You will need to unmute yourself, the first thread. We can see the slides. We still can't hear you.
Chris, please unmute your. Chris, please unmute.
1 second.
Yes, we could hear you. We could hear you now.
Oh, you can hear me. Great. Okay. My apologies. And it's you can hear me okay now?
Yes, we can hear you now clearly.
Okay. Well, it's a really special honor to be delivering this lecture today. And thank you particularly, Dr. Yadav, and your team for inviting me to take part in this. My side of the presentation will be the wider context for the ex-situ program, but also giving you a little bit of the in-situ aspects and background to that. So thank you very much. I'll be giving you a global perspective initially, but then actually this story is very much an Asian story, and India is absolutely central to that. So I'm just moving through to the fact that vultures worldwide, there are 20 vultures and condors. The New World vultures and Old World vultures are actually quite distantly related, but the Old World vultures are the main bulk of the species. And here's a slightly more friendly looking version of all of the old vultures together. But you'll see that when you look at those vultures and the threat status, over half of the world's vulture species are in the red list of endangered species. And it's really, especially in the Old World, the threats that are responsible for pushing these species towards extinction are actually quite different in different parts of the world. And there was a recent exercise by the Convention of Migratory Species Raptors MOU for all the Old World vultures, and produced this very, very helpful map of what the predominant threats are in different parts of the Old World. And actually in Africa, there are, poison baits are probably the biggest single threat. but even the motivation for poison baits threats are quite different. It can be poachers who want to deliberately kill vultures because they are showing the authorities where their poaching activities are. That's in southern Africa, and in West Africa, beef-based use. So what people might refer to as traditional medicine, although we don't believe there are any medicinal values to vultures, are behind some of the main deliberate threats to vultures, along with some of the other hazards that they face. In Asia, it's quite different, and South Asia in particular, it's predominated by the veterinary drugs and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are the main thing, and I'll be coming on to say a bit more. But this is the multi-species action plan, which underpins that, and that's available if anyone's interested. So let's, that's just a very quick flavour of what's happening worldwide. Of course, there's an awful lot more to say, but here in Asia and India, we have 9 of those 23 species in the world. So 9 of them, a very high proportion of the world's vultures, are found in India. But the population estimates for these species are really perilously low in several cases. And just look at that figure for slender-billed vulture there, for example, just between 1,200 and 1,800 birds in the world. So any threat to that population is of a very, very special significance. And Oriental white-backed or white-rumped vulture at the top there was formerly thought to be the most abundant large raptor in the whole world, and now just look at its world population down to 8,600 individuals. Really extraordinary transformation. I mean, I can talk a lot more about all of these, but I think I need to keep going, and let's look at the Indian context. And of course, we've got very special cultural value. The story in Hindu mythology of Jatayu, along with the significance to the Parsi community and Towers of Silence, where vultures disposed of dead bodies and taking people to the next world, and likewise in the high Himalaya. Other vultures there do a similar thing, but of course they were very much part of rural everyday life throughout the entire country just 20 years ago. And scenes like this, these slides from pictures from Delhi, I use in just about every presentation to show the superabundance of vultures, which there was quite recently. So, of course, as well as the cultural significance, we have the role of vultures. We got a bit of interference, yeah. Okay, thank you. And of course, the estimate for India was actually 40 million birds were found in India 20 years ago, back in the early 1980s, and sorry, early 1990s even. And they would dispose of vast quantities of rotting meat. And of course, all of that meat is now, something else happens to it. Some of that meat is now consumed by feral dogs, and we all understand the threat, and there have been significant increases of feral dogs particularly in the early 2000s. And rabies remains a very real threat, with 6,000–7,000 human deaths in India every year. So human health knock-on effects of losing those vultures, which can't be overemphasized. Now, the population trends in India of the birds, this graph doesn't look that dramatic until you realize that that is plotted on a logarithmic scale. And thankfully, Vibhu Prakash and his team did some surveys in the early 1990s where we have an index at least of the former abundance, and threats have continued and declines have continued in early 2000s. Can somebody turn their microphone off? Yeah, thank you. Yes, and we have some sort of stabilization of populations going on. I'm going to come back to that at the end of the talk in terms of further update. But and in all my talks, I have to give this warning that inevitably, and people who know me know that, and who know the vulture story know that we have to have a strong focus on the role of diclofenac, which was unraveled in the early 2000s. By 2003 and early 2004, the main cause of those dramatic declines was established very, very clearly by Lindsay Oakes and his team, first in Pakistan, but very quickly reinforced by work by BNHS and also in Nepal, where dead vultures, and one common feature of a lot of the dead vultures which were being picked up was that they all had visceral gout and these white crystals on their intestines and inner organs, and in the end that was categorically linked to when diclofenac causes this, and it actually, the diclofenac causes kidney failure in the vultures, and it's kidney failure that actually kills the birds. But I should just, for anyone who's not familiar, diclofenac was being used as a painkiller and anti-inflammatory in cattle, originally in humans, and it still is used. But unfortunately for vultures, when they consume a dead cow that's been treated by this drug, it is absolutely highly toxic. And any birds that were found dead that did not have gout did not have diclofenac when the tests were done. So, and there's more up-to-date information. This was what really sent the big message that we and some actions that were needed back in 2004, which is when I started on the Vulture program in my role to try and coordinate the actions that were needed. So, there were two key actions required. The first was removing diclofenac from the environment, which needed finding a safe alternative and getting effective bans of diclofenac. But the second and key priority was establishing an ex-situ program, a breeding program to secure at least the 3 species of Gyps vultures, and first to secure them because the declines were going on so fast, those logarithmic scale declines, but also with the future goal for actually working towards a release program and all the benefits that that can bring. And I think, so just quickly to run through some of the in-situ conservation that led to the bans. There was an awful lot of science behind it, a lot of publicity, video and Mike Pandey film, a lot of press coverage, reaching the conservation community to get them on board, because actually many people were very skeptical whether a veterinary drug could really have caused these dramatic declines, and discussions with government. But the Pradipto Ghosh, the secretary at the time, was very much clued in on the science behind the need for a ban, and those bans came through. And I think India led the way in 2006, gazetted in 2008, and very quickly, well, almost simultaneously, Nepal and Pakistan followed a bit later by Bangladesh, Iran, and most recently by Cambodia, where diclofenac has just recently been found in veterinary use. The second step in 2015 was getting human diclofenac ban in place for the large vials, because we found that large vials of human diclofenac were not needed in human medicine, but it was actually a rather cynical move by the pharmaceutical companies to make it available to vets to use illegally. So getting that ban, I think, was an important further step. One further in situ measure, which has evolved in time and has been going for at least 10 years now, is the concept of something more localized, a vulture safe zone, 100-kilometer radius, and these areas which have been, where initiatives have taken place, are marked on the map there. And this gives some, it's basically targeted awareness, but also pharmacy surveys and other vulture surveys in those areas. So teams of 5 or 6 people really making sure the government, local government authorities and DFOs are all fully aware of what needs to happen, and they're based where there are at least some vultures left. I could talk a lot more about that, but just so you're aware that that's going on. So that's as much as I'm going to say about the in situ work up to now. So the ex situ work, which Vibhu is going to tell you much more about than I will now, but just to say that been working very closely with BNHS and Vibhu in particular to develop and bring in the right expertise from different programs all over the world, California condor and Eurasian griffon vulture work, Jemima Parry-Jones, various experts from South Africa, to actually pull together and get the methodologies and expertise instilled here, and because nobody had bred these species when we started this back in 2004. And well, I'll try not to steal too much of Vibhu's thunder, and I'll let him tell you more about these details. But I do just want to mention that the centres, as Dr. Yadav has just shown, in India, but there are just only 2 such centres outside India, just to be aware of. One in southern Nepal and one in eastern Pakistan. But both of those are relatively smaller than most of the centres here in India. But I'll let Vibhu tell you much more about that. Another thing I wanted to explain a little bit more about is that back in 2010, when we'd made a lot of progress, we'd got those bans in place, we needed to review priorities, we needed a regional recovery plan, highlighting work and get communication going. And so we came up with the idea of establishing a consortium. And Jarem Ramesh kindly agreed to help us launch this in February 2011. And we were also very privileged to have Professor Ian Newton, probably the world's most leading expert on raptors, who'd been taking a keen interest in it, and he agreed to be our chair for the first 4 years and remains very, very interested. And we really wanted to pull together all the organizations that were following the agreed scientific backed actions that were needed. And I think initially we were 11 and quickly 14, but we're now up to 24 organisations that are fully signed up. But as well as those 24 that are signed up, we have the various, some of the state governments and national governments, and indeed Central Zoo Authority has been very much on the scene of this. It's rather pleasing that in Nepal and Bangladesh, the government departments were able to sign up, but we have IVRI, the Indian Veterinary Research Institute, is very much an active partner in saving Asia's vultures from extinction. And the premise of SAVE is that we meet once a year physically, normally, maybe not this year. We'll maybe doing it virtually, I expect, but every November we meet, and importantly we review the regional recovery plan that we've pulled together with the key targeted actions. And for every action, those traffic light colours on the left represent different actions, and whether we are green, happy that they're going okay, or of course you can see a number of red ones which we're worried are behind schedule in terms of saving these species from extinction. And you can download that from the SAVE website. So I think I've already touched on the threats for Asia, but even within the region for those 3 Gyps species actually covers from Pakistan through to Cambodia. So there are actually 6 countries with significant, or at least some kind of viable population. India is predominant for all 3 of those species, but for South Asia, the threats from that CMS action plan that I showed earlier come out absolutely, even now, despite the ban in diclofenac, as non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, diclofenac among them as being the top one. But in Southeast Asia, there are actually other threats which are predominant. So even within Asia, we have differences, and the poison baits threat and in food availability in Southeast Asia is definitely important. Before I move on to summing up, I just want to also mention that there is a regional steering committee set up between the 4 South Asian governments, which is running in parallel and very much and meets every year, and this is a further forum for reporting and comparing how progress is going on the action plan. But they have adopted the SAVE blueprint, as we call it, the regional action plan, as the guidance for that. So some quick and recent updates. One thing we've actually managed to do this year is produced a policy statement summarizing all the key facts, but also those threats for India specifically. That's available on that link, and you can download that. And probably my favorite or most crucial part of that is unfortunately the list of these non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So diclofenac is there at the bottom, which of course is banned as a veterinary drug in across the South Asian countries. But unfortunately, one thing that has emerged more recently is that other drugs, aceclofenac, ketoprofen, are also highly toxic to vultures. Nimesulide is looking a very, very serious concern, and I'll say a little bit more about that. Thankfully, we have meloxicam, and it was finding that meloxicam was a safe alternative at the beginning was a crucial step in terms of giving the vets an alternative drug they could use, which is largely, most vets are happy with it as an alternative, and some actually prefer it. one thing, well, I'll mention tolfenamic acid in just a moment. I mentioned that for the vulture safe zones, one of the activities is going to pharmacies and asking which drugs they're selling to the vets. And we've got a lot of information from that. And actually there's a paper that's just been accepted this week, so will be published in the next month or two. And this is a preview of one of the figures from that paper, which shows when people go and actually undercover, they go and ask for a veterinary drug to cure their cow, you get much better information than if you go openly, because many of the drugs, the pharmacies know that it's illegal to sell diclofenac, so you get a better picture. But you will see that from these undercover surveys, this drug that I've just mentioned, nimesulide, is unfortunately very much available in several parts of India and being used more and more widely. And we've had at least 5 dead vultures with visceral gout, as I mentioned, what we had been regarding as mainly a feature of dead vultures killed by diclofenac, but we know that but when we've tested their tissues, there's been no diclofenac, nothing else obviously wrong with them, but high nimesulide in the tissues. And in Gujarat in particular, we've had some corpses, but we are sure that that's a widespread problem. So nimesulide is looking like our next biggest worry. We haven't been able to do safety testing on that so far. Meloxicam, which is the safe drug, you'll see is fairly available, and in some states it's more available. You know, in Assam it's being very widely used. So Assam may be a safer place for vultures to be released than other states. But there's a lot more there, and you can read the paper very, very soon. This is just to highlight aceclofenac particularly. It's actually what they call a prodrug. It's converted to diclofenac inside the cow or buffalo, and you can have it in tablet form, but more worryingly, there are injectable forms which are becoming popular. Unfortunately, it's legal, so getting a ban of aceclofenac is unfortunately a very, very high priority, and anyone who knows about these things will very quickly say, oh yes, that's exactly what it does. It turns to diclofenac, and we've even got some publications to prove that. So that's a big worry. But one very nice positive is that the IVRI, with the help and support of BNHS, have been safety testing tolfenamic acid on Himalayan griffons, actually, as a surrogate. We know Himalayan griffons are also sensitive to diclofenac and NSA poisoning, but tolfenamic acid is looking like it's safe, and we're looking forward to an announcement on this very soon. It's not published yet, but watch this space. And so hopefully the vets will be cheered up a bit by that. So I've been talking very much about India so far. Just to switch briefly to Nepal, where more regular road transect surveys have been done annually, almost annually. And the blue line there is white-rumped vulture population. And you will see that there really is the beginning of a population recovery there. And that is now statistically significant. And in fact, even for slender-billed vulture, it's looking hopeful too, although there are much smaller numbers there. But so in Nepal, where there's been some very intensive work to remove the NSAIDs more effectively, and it's backed up. There's a lot more information again in this paper, which will be published soon, and I don't have time to go into the detail of that, but which backs up that Nepal is indeed a lot safer. And there is this small breeding centre there, and the first white-rumped vultures, the first 3 sets of white-rumped vultures have been released with satellite tags, and that is very much going rather well. That's the release aviary on the right. Some of the birds from that release in Chitwan, on the edge of Chitwan National Park there near the UP border, had up until really in the first year, they hadn't been moving very far at all, really only up to 10 kilometers. But since the pandemic, and we don't know all the reasons why, but since March this year, they've suddenly started moving, and including crossing into India and causing all sorts of crazy stories about whether they're spies and all sorts of things. So, I mean, important that the science and the knowledge and understanding of everyone is that these are really important birds which are pioneers in the release program from Nepal. And we hope that we will be seeing, and Vibhu will be telling us a bit more about where we are with the releases planned here in India. But we have had pilot releases here in India for Himalayan griffons so far, and indeed one in West Bengal in December with the first satellite tracked birds, which are doing well. So that is going to be the next step. And had COVID not come along, we were all set to do our first release in Haryana in March, but hopefully we can do that soon. I think I've covered that. We're just back to the other updates. This is actually a new initiative and a new consortium formed in Myanmar, where there's small populations of 2 or 3 of the vulture species. But this slide summarizes all the key priorities which we know are needed for vultures across South Asia, and the immediate withdrawal of licenses for aceclofenac, ketoprofen, well, nimesulide. The safety testing has to be completed by IVRI, and that's so urgent. But those are top priority. Getting the tests completed and published for the tolfenamic acid, vulture safe zone work, and getting that up and running, and getting more people involved. I think at the moment there's a lot of potential for more organisations and more participation from government authorities in supporting vulture safe zone work across the country will be really important, which will be one way of monitoring the drug availability, but also monitoring the causes of vulture mortality, and getting dead vultures and finding out what they died of is a priority and something that we will really hoping to do more of there. But and right at the end there, I've squeezed in releases, and that's probably should have its own heading really, because the releases are going to be the crucial part of finding out, well, and that's maybe jumping to the second point there. So how is ex-situ work actually helping the conservation of these species? And yes, back in 2004, getting birds into those breeding centres was very much just conserving the genetic stock, making sure they didn't go totally extinct, because that was crucial. Developing the methodology for breeding, but of course as a source for birds to release, and the releases are a way of testing just how safe the environment is. And then also as a focus, I think if we didn't have these breeding centres, there wouldn't be the same focus for actually people to come to and to get involved, and like the safety testing of IVRI is all being done in connection with the breeding centres, even though we're not using those birds except for the very final final check on any safety testing, but that's a really important reason why ex-situ work, and I must admit, ex-situ work is not something that, I work for the Royal Society of Protecting the Birds, well, I'm based here in Bangalore, but from the UK, and we don't get involved in ex-situ work very often, but this is such an emergency operation. It's something that really needs doing, and we've ended up managing to bring some funding to help get these centres up and running, but there is a very real worry and risk that funding is not enough and not regular enough, and so that is a major concern. The question at the top there: are populations recovering? Well, in Nepal, they definitely are showing signs of recovery, where those drugs are coming down in proportion. But in India, I think the short answer is not really yet. I think they're stabilizing, but the indications and Vibhu's and his team's 7,000-kilometer road transect surveys, again, were due to be repeated this year. So we would have had an update on how well things are going or not. That's had to be postponed for another year. But then there's actually the State of India's Birds Index has come up, and the indications from that is that there are still 10 and 15% declines per year coming through. That's citizen science data, which is needs verification, but the signs are not conclusive and not very good. In Gujarat, the annual surveys are showing ongoing declines. Madhya Pradesh may be a little bit better, but those surveys really need repeating a little bit more often. So I hope that we are getting there. Ex-situ has a massive role to play in this, in supplying for the release program, but also maintaining the stocks of birds for the future. And if you do want to be put onto a mailing list for further updates, but you can always look at the SAVE website there. And I think I've managed to do it more or less on time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chris. That was spot on in terms of time, and also for the amount of information and the new insights that you have given. It is extremely useful, especially in many ways an eye-opener in terms of the drugs that we can use, and also in terms of what the vultures are doing during the lockdown period. So in a way, you've also responded to some of the questions which are coming up on the YouTube channel. And if time permitting, we will get back to you on that. And thanks once again. So I will now move on to the next speaker, which is Dr. Vibhu Prakash. Dr. Vibhu Prakash is the Principal Scientist and Deputy Director of Bombay Natural History Society and Head of the Vulture Conservation Program of the Society. He has been working on raptors and vultures since 1984, and he and his team, along with support of the state forest departments, have initiated the vulture conservation breeding programs at Haryana, West Bengal, Assam, and Madhya Pradesh. VCBC Pinjore has been recognized as the coordinating zoo for vulture conservation in the country by Caesar Day, and the program has been successful in breeding all the 3 critically endangered Gyps species of vultures. So over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon to all of you. And I am really grateful to Dr. S.P. Yadav and Dr. Sonali Ghosh for giving me this opportunity to talk on vultures. I will be giving my presentation on the 3 critical and the slendable vulture. These 3 species of vultures were very common till a couple of decades ago, and we had an estimate about 4 crore population of these species. And most of them perished because of the use of a veterinary drug called diclofenac. And now they are all critically endangered, as which we have lost 99% of the population. And a conservation breeding program has been initiated as an insurance against extinction. The Central Zoo Authority, it's in the top priority list of Central Zoo Authority for conservation breeding and recovery program. And all the 3 species are in the top 2 of the list. The Central Zoo Authority has identified Vulture Conservation Breeding Center Pinjore as the coordinating zoo, and it has provided technical support as well as funding support to 5 other centers in the country. And it continues to provide technical support to other centers through the coordinating zoo for running of. Similarly, the Ministry of Environment and Forest, Government of India, in its action plan in 2006, identified conservation breeding for the 3 Gyps species of vultures as the most important action to save them from possible extinction, as we had lost 99% of the population. The Central Zoo Authority has also developed a manual for setting up the vulture conservation breeding program, for the husbandry and care, and for the running of the center, and especially the management. The husbandry and care guidelines and protocols developed in this program are based on the experience of Vulture Conservation Breeding Center at Pinjore. And, it is, the conservation breeding program is not difficult, but if the guidelines are followed to the hilt, then we will be successful. And this manual is very helpful in that. So when we thought of doing conservation breeding program, the immediate question was how many birds we should breed, because it's not difficult to breed birds if you give them the right condition, but you should breed the number of birds which can be released back and can perform the ecological role. So we thought of, we did a mathematical modeling and thought of each of the 3 species back in the wild, and to get 600 pairs of each of the 3 species, we thought of establishing at least 6 different centers in the country, and from each centers we thought of releasing 100 pairs in the wild. And to get 100 pairs, we thought of having 25 founder pairs in each of the centers. And because vultures, they are long living, and you can age vultures till they are 5 years old, not beyond that. So a 5 years old or 40 years old vulture will look alike. And because we want to have known age birds in the conservation breeding program, so we collected nestlings and juveniles. 70% were nestlings and juveniles, and rest were adults and sub-adults, which we thought would act as guide birds to these young birds. So now we have 8 different centers, conservation breeding centers in the country. Pinjore, Rajabhat, Kawa, Rani, and Bhopal are run by the state forest departments in collaboration with Bombay Natural Society. And the rest of the 4 centers are sponsored by the Central Zoo Authority, and they are in the state as satellite facilities and are run by the state zoos, and the technical support is provided by the coordinating zoo. So this is a typical layout plan of a conservation breeding program. A conservation breeding program should be in the natural distribution of the species, and it should be away from poultry farms or animal collections like zoos, because then there is a serious risk of disease transmission. And Pinjore Center is ideally located for that. So at center, we have number of different aviaries for different purposes and different age class of birds. And as you know, when you keep birds in captivity, disease is a serious concern. So we have very good quarantine facilities for birds. So when the birds are brought in the center, they are straight away taken to the quarantine facility where they are kept for 45 days. And if after the health they are found healthy, they are brought to the centers. And 45 days is the incubation period of the most prevalent disease in aves, that is the Ranicate disease. And if these birds are carrying disease, it will appear in 45 days. And birds, when they are brought to the center, they are either kept in the nursery aviary or in the holding aviary if they are juveniles, or in the colony aviary, which are our largest aviaries in the center. Vultures are social birds, have to be kept in flocks. So we have our largest aviary is 100 feet long, 40 feet wide and 20 feet high. And in this we can keep 30 plus birds easily. And the aviary is well ventilated. It has all facilities for the birds. It has water troughs, perches and all. And vultures are big birds of prey. And these large birds of prey, the problem comes when you keep them in captivity is in their feet. So when they are out and open in the wild, they are most of the time up in the sky and soaring. But when they are in captivity, they have to be perched, and that creates problem in their feet. So they develop pressure sores in their foot pad, and that can become develop into a disease called bumblefoot. It gets infected, and it's very difficult to treat. But you can easily overcome it by giving them a rough surface to perch on. And so what we do, we just wound coconut rope on the perches, and then we don't get disease. So, and we have other aviaries also at the center, like display aviary, hospital aviary for keeping sick birds, and breeding aviaries for keeping pairs which don't feel comfortable breeding in colony aviaries. Because we have a conservation breeding program, so all our birds are marked, because it's very important to know the genetics of the breeding birds. So we put a wing tag, we also ring the birds, and we also put a microchip which is forever, and we keep all their morphometrics electronically. So all information is stored for all the birds which we have right from the beginning, and we know which bird is breeding with whom. We catch all our birds once in a year and give them a thorough health check just to make sure they are healthy. And we bleed 10% of the bird and check their blood samples, and just to ensure they are doing fine. And if there's any problem, then we treat them. Otherwise, we don't give them any anti-helminths or any vaccines or anything, because these birds have to be left back in the wild. We also have developed good laboratory facilities, because for avian diseases, there are very few facilities in the country. Even to get blood analysis of birds is difficult. So we have tried to develop these facilities in our centers. So we can do hematology, biochemistry. And these birds are not sexually dimorphic. So you cannot make out a male from a female. You can do it only through their DNA. So we do have a small genetic lab and also a microbiology to study their gut flora and fauna. And feeding, food is another very important aspect of conservation breeding. And as you know, most of our vultures perished because of the use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, especially diclofenac. So what we do, we keep goats with us for 7 days. And if they have been treated with diclofenac, the diclofenac is excreted out within 72 hours. And then we skin the goats and we give the entire carcasses to the vultures. We feed vultures twice a week, just to mimic what's the conditions in the wild. And each vulture gets 4 kilos of meat per week. That works out to be 5% of its body weight. And that's how a normal living being feeds. And we, in fact, try to little underfeed the vultures because they are in captivity and don't spend that much energy, and they keep themselves fit. So this is how they feed. As soon as the food is given, all of them jump. White-backed vultures, long-billed and slender-billed vulture, they like to wait for a day or so and then come. And they very quickly finish the food, and there is no hierarchy. The hungry bird is dominant, not the powerful one. And we try to keep one species in a aviary, because although they cannot interbreed, they can form pairs, and that is useful. And vultures love to take baths. So we have good number of water troughs, and we top them up every morning. If you don't do it, they will not take bath. So after food, they always take bath, and it is almost one by one. No fights. They are very civilized. And the vultures, they like to get a lot of sun, so they spread their wings whenever there's bright sunshine. And this is largely to shed ectoparasites and thermoregulate, have their plumage in good shape. And because breeding the wings or flying around, they do everything together. And you see how calm they are. They are in captivity. If they are, I guess they breed successfully. And if to keep them in flocks, they are very comfortable, even in captivity. And aviaries are very well ventilated, a lot of air. Whenever there is gush of wind, these will try to exercise. They do vigorous wind exercise because there is wind, and they keep their wings in good shape. Their pectoral muscles remain in good, and back wild, I'm sure they will be able to fly absolutely no problem. And because they are again social birds, all the birds in the aviary will be doing this. They will be, whenever there's gush of wind, they, bird at back is a juvenile, and the bird in front is an adult. It takes plumage, but once a bird is adult, it's very difficult to age it because a 5 years old or a 40 years old birds look similar. So that's why we have collected, have the known sex birds. And these birds are, they start breeding when they are 5 to 6 years old, but they start 3 to 4 years old. When a male usually offers a twig to the female, and the female twig, they become there for life. If one of them dies, it is immediately replaced. The nesting at the center takes place like there in the wild during the number, and they share all the duties of nesting together. From the ground and bring them to the nest. Some of the pairs, they build nest for almost 2 months, but some of them just make a scrap and then lay an egg. And building nest also increases the pair bonding. We have CCTV cameras in all our centers, and we could also record egg laying by this bird. Birds usually lay during evening, during the dusk and dawn. And without any disturbance, we can do all observations. And once the egg is laid, both the birds help in incubating. And they take turns to incubate the eggs. And it takes almost 55 days for the birds, for the eggs to hatch. They almost never leave the leg alone, but they do stand up and roll the egg just to make sure that it gets heat on all the sides, and usually they have very long incubation shifts. So the bird stretch themselves off and on just to keep them in shape. You will see how well this bird stretches. The incubation shift can be 8 to 10 hours also. And the egg hatches at about 55 days. And the chick which hatches usually have a very sparse coat of down, and it is not able to thermoregulate. So the parents sit over the chick to keep it warm, and it lasts for 45 days. And then the chick is it can be left alone. Feeding is, the birds, they bring the food in the crop and they regurgitate in the nest, and chick picks it up. So whenever the parents are on the nest, the chick is constantly pecking at the beak, inducing the bird to regurgitate, and the other partner is always there when the chick is being pecked. And it appears that it's trying to control the size of morsel which comes out, probably because they feel that it can choke the chick. And you know that when the chick about 150 grams, but within 3 to 4 months, it becomes 4 to 5 kilos. So the growth is very fast, and the calcium requirement is very, very high. So the birds, they bring really big bones for the chicks and they feed them on. And because these chicks, the birds, vultures have a very acidic digestive tract, they can very easily digest the bones also, and it gets dissolved. And you'll see how about a big bone it brings out from its crop, and the chick just feeds on it. And the birds, the vulture chick, it takes almost 2 months to start standing up. And if it doesn't do that, then we are worried, because then there can be problem with calcium deficiencies. And if the chick has calcium deficiencies, it's almost impossible to save it, because it develops metabolic bone disease and dies. So we have to be very careful in giving the right amount of calcium. So as Dr. Yadav said, we have got now about 750 birds in various breeding centers, and most of the birds are Pinjore, Baksa, and Rani. We have about 354 birds at Pinjore. And it is because we have bred almost 400 chicks so far in the different breeding centers, and of them 274 are just from Pinjore. And it is largely because in Pinjore we do artificial incubation and double clutching. So when the vultures usually lay 1 egg per year, but if the egg fails for certain reasons, it lays again within 15 to 20 days. So we take advantage of this, and we remove the egg 10 days after it has been laid, and we artificially incubate it. The birds then relay again, and they incubate the second clutch. So the egg is then brought to the incubator room, which is thermo-controlled, which is maintained at 19 to 23 degrees. And these are tabletop hot air incubators, and 4 eggs can be incubated in each of them. And we incubate eggs at 30.9 degrees centigrade. And we keep a close watch weight of the egg, because the eggs for successful hatching should lose between 14 to 17% of his weight by if it is losing too much weight, then what we do is we increase it. And it's quite simple. There are wells in the incubator, and we just pour water in it, and so incubation humidity is increased very quickly, and we can control the weight loss again. And when the egg is losing too much weight, when egg is not losing enough weight, then we and we control, usually hatches. We also doing candling, and you can actually see the embryo inside and the various blood vessels. It's a good way of monitoring the growth of chick. And we usually turn the incubator once in every hour, but also every 3 times a day, every day, just to give them even heat all around. So, and till 40 days, you think the egg is dead, because you hardly see any movement in the egg. But after 40 days, if you keep it on a firm surface, the egg starts twitching, and that's when you know that egg has life, and it becomes very exciting. And when the egg is 52 days in incubation, it actually cracks itself, which we call external pit. 2 days before that, starts calling from inside, and then in 55 days, it hatches. And when the chick hatches, it has got a very sparse coat of down. And for the first day, we don't feed for the first 12 hours, we don't feed the chicks at all. And then, and the first day it just sleeps. And from second day onwards, we give it 2 grams of meat 3 times a day. And then we keep monitoring its weight. And we make sure that the first 3 days, the weight doesn't increase by more than 7%. And till 28th day, the weight doesn't increase by more than 9%. And if we can do that, the chick grows successfully. From third day onwards, we also give the chick different organs of the animal, like the heart, liver, and all. But we make sure that the weight doesn't increase too much, because it's very easy to overfeed a chick and kill it than to underfeed. So we always make the show, and calcium requirement is very high. So 1% of the total diet is always calcium carbonate. So this is how we feed the chick and keep a close eye on its weight. Okay. And after every 3 days old, we keep them out in sun, because they require vitamin D3 for calcium assimilation. If they don't get this, they cannot assimilate calcium, and they will have problems. And then they are kept in sun only for half an hour. Then they are kept in brooder boxes for another 5 days. And the temperature is regularly brought down, but they are kept in groups, so they imprint on each other, not on us. So when the chicks are about 10 to 15 days old, they are given back to the parents. And since vultures have hardly any olfactory sense, you can give it any chick and they will accept it. So the first clutch chick is given to the bird, and take the second egg, and the second egg is incubated by us again, and the chick is then reared by the parents. And this is how they are. And this is how we have increased the hatchability of the second clutch by almost 70%. And we rear the chicks all in flocks, in groups, to avoid imprinting, because imprinting could be a very serious problem in captive breeding. When the chicks started thinking that ones of its kind, if after 10 days we expose it to the bird. And the chicks, they fledge when they are 110 days old or so, 120 days old, and they are then shifted to the holding aviaries. Now we have bred enough number of chicks, and the diclofenac prevalence has also gone down. So we are thinking of initiating the reintroduction program. So this year we will be releasing some more from Pinjore Center into the wild. So we monitor the prevalence of drugs in cattle carcasses all across the country by going and collecting liver samples from cattle carcasses from the carcass dumps. So before the ban, there were over 11% of the carcasses at diclofenac, but till 2013, the percentage has come down to 2% in the carcasses, and now it has further come down. And with the restriction on the size of the human vials, which were being misused in treating cattle, we hope that the prevalence of diclofenac will still come down. So when we release the birds, it's not going to be like we will just lift the netting and the birds will be free to go. We will not do that. We do a soft release. So we have prepared a pre-release aviary, which is very open, so birds can see all around and the aviary is in the habitat where the birds are going to be released, and they also get exposed to the other animals and the predators which they will get, although they are still under enclosure, but they can see all of them. And because when we release the birds, we will be putting satellite tags on them or the tracking devices. So they will have to carry some weight. So just to make them used to carry weights, we put dummy tags on them before releasing them to pre-release aviary. And you know, all our conservation breeding centers are off display, so they are not for public. But since we now have to release birds back in the wild, we need support from the public. So what the best way is to invite public figures to the center. And so what we did, we invited the Chief Minister of Haryana to release the bird pre-release aviary, and that proved to be very helpful. And because of a lot of publicity we got. This is how pre-release aviary looks like. The birds can see all around. We also have crows now get in, so vultures will know what to expect when they are in the wild, and also see other free-ranging vultures, because we attract free-ranging vultures just outside the aviaries, and we hope that there is good interaction between our captive bred birds, which are inside, and the free-release and the free-ranging birds, which are outside. And because vultures are social birds, once they will be released, they are surely going to join the wild free-ranging birds, and then their survival will be much better. See, this is how the interaction takes place. The dark bird is free-ranging bird, and this young bird is inside, and the free-ranging bird wants to come inside, and the bird in captivity wants to go outside. You know, the grass on the other side is always greener. So what we have done so far, we have released 2 Himalayan griffons because they were in captivity with us for 10 years. And many people think that the birds which remain in captivity for so long, when they are released out in the open, they will not be able to fly. Although we knew that the way we have kept birds, these birds will be able to fly once they are released back in the wild. But nevertheless, we thought we will release them first and see what happens. So that's how we did a test release in 2016. Those days, we didn't have PTT, the tracking device. And release them. We had invited the Honorable Union Minister to come and release the birds back. So he came in June 2016, and the birds were released in the wild. So he came and opened the gates on the 3rd June, but for the next 24 hours, the birds just didn't go out anywhere. They just kept sitting. We had provided them with nice, juicy goat. We had also given water. The free-ranging birds also came and fed, but these birds didn't move. Exactly 24 after we had lifted the gate, these birds showed signs of going out. They apparently knew that the cages are open and they can go. And see how quickly how they went out of the cage without dashing anywhere, almost like professionals. They went out. Let's see how they just went out the gate and crashing anywhere. So another 10-15 days, the birds remain close to the center, and we will provide food, which it will feed with free-ranging vultures, and will behave exactly like a wild bird. But it was scared of us. It will not come to us asking for food. And within a month's time, the bird started soaring and flying. It would avoid trees. It will not dash anywhere. There were also power pylons, there were electricity wires and everything, but it will look for thermals and then it will start climbing as a typical wild bird will do. And we were very pleased with it. And remember, this bird was in captivity for 10 years in our center, and then it was released back. This bird will also interact with the free-ranging birds. The smaller birds will mob it, but it will kind of not mind anything, and it will keep flying. But after 45 days, this disappeared in the clouds and went northwards, and we could not trace it. And since it didn't have a tracking device, we could not find out where it has gone. Although we did circulate these pamphlets all over, and people did call us up twice or thrice, but after that we didn't hear about it. But by the time it was in last, we could monitor it for 45 days. By 10 different teams following it, it had started finding its own food and water. So I'm sure it would have survived after that. And now we are going to reintroduce the critically endangered white-backed vulture. We are going to release 6 of captive bred vultures and 2 wild-caught adults into the wild. And we hope these wild-caught adults will add to the bird, our captive bred birds. And we have obtained the satellite tags and the other tracking devices for these vultures. And we are also making sure that in 100 kilometers radius from the center, the environment is safe for the birds, especially there is little prevalence of diclofenac and other toxic drugs. There is food and there is no other threat to the vultures. So this is the 100 kilometer radius which we are monitoring. We are especially monitoring the wild vultures population, food, going to the carcasses dump and actually counting the number of carcasses available. And we think there's a lot of food for the vultures. There's no problem. Habitat is very good. There's absolutely no problem. Prevalence of diclofenac has gone down, but it is still there a bit, and we are trying to make sure that the human diclofenac is not used for veterinary, for treating cattle. Of course, there is problem of aceclofenac and nimesulide, which we are working with authorities to make sure it is not used for cattle. And we are so far getting good support from all the 5 state governments which are there in 100 kilometers radius from the center. And that's all I have to say. And we are not alone. We have help from number of national and international organizations, and of course from the Forest Department. And Ministry of Environment and Forest and Environment Change has always been a big supporter. Thank you very much. And that's all I had to say. And I will happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, sir. That was very, very informative. And I think many of the questions which we are now seeing in the chat box have been answered in your presentation. I'll request all 3 of the speakers to switch their videos and microphones on. I think I'll take a couple of questions because many of them have already been answered. But perhaps one question to you, Dr. Vibhu Prakash first. And of course, obviously, you've mentioned that the question is that, yes, that what will be, when will the Jatayu Vulture Breeding Center conduct its release of the captive bred vultures? You have mentioned that it will be when you get the satellite transmitter permissions. But having said that, the question is that how much management of dogs, feral, free ranging in and around release sites is crucial for vultures as well. So yeah, so 2 questions bundled into one for you.
Well, I may not be clear, but we have obtained permission and we have also obtained the satellite tags. We have got now 8 of them, and we will be putting on vultures, and we this winter. And as far as dogs are concerned, you know, I've been working on vultures for the captive breeding program, and we will spread a carcass to attract vultures. And what we will do, we'll make sure that the dog comes. I believe we will not be able to attract vultures on the carcass unless the dog comes. The vultures don't really come. So I don't think dogs are that big a threat. Only we are taking care that we will release vultures with the free flock of free ranging vultures. So there will be number of vultures with them. And the other thing is we will be provisioning food for vultures very close to the center, and we hope that they will initial days they will be they will remain close to the center, and then this will not be a problem.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Vibhu Prakash. I'll move on to Dr. Chris. Again, two questions bundled for you. Is that what derivatives are poachers targeting vultures for? Obviously not in India, but in the other regions that you showed. And how do we create awareness for the vulture safe zones? What do you think should be the awareness outreach activities, and especially zoos across the country, do you think they can act and help in awareness building?
Okay, thank you very much. In Africa, the poachers, they're not interested mostly in the vultures at all in terms of products. They just don't want the vultures to be around to indicate where there's a dead elephant or rhino. So because the authorities use them to find poached animals. So they call that sentinel poaching, is the term we use, but that's not to be confused with the belief-based use poisoning, which is for products, and there are various parts and bones, and the head in particular, that have got some very strange beliefs about what people can do with them. So that's that one. On the awareness related, yes, and I mean, there's a lot more I could say about vulture safe zones generally, but awareness, and I'm sure there is more that, or there are various things that zoos could do to highlight, the threats. Actually, that short brochure that I mentioned on the policy summary, there's materials there that could be conveyed about why vultures have disappeared, and getting those scientific facts clear in people's minds, and actually messages to the veterinary community above all, and of course, for every qualified vet, there are 3 paravets or quacks. So there's a whole range of people to reach in terms of the end users, of people who are buying these drugs, and the pharmacy outlets themselves. But so I mean, there are a number of ways in which you can reach those community groups, and we're developing a bit more detail on the vulture safe zone work at the moment from the other countries. And just to mention that in Bangladesh, the 2 vulture safe zones there, they've only got relatively smaller populations, but both those populations have got a vulture safe zone centered there, and the government has actually taken the very major step of gazetting those as formally and legally, so any drug restrictions and things can be implemented on a vulture safe zone scale, but the effectiveness of these, I mean, I think the Nepalese example that I mentioned is something which really shows that this kind of approach and community approach, fairly grassroots stuff, it can be effective, but it needs to be right from top to bottom in terms of having all levels of government aware, as well as local community leaders and others, and the veterinarians are the key group. I could go on, but I think that's probably largely answers it. Do look at the materials on the SAVE website, would be my further follow-up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Due to paucity of time, I'll just wind up and ask the last question to Dr. Yadav, sir. So the question is interesting. Will creation of a separate national authority on conservation of birds in the country help vulture conservation?
Okay. Before we consider the creation of national authority for vulture conservation, we have to see 2 things. What is the status of population? What is the trend of population? And what are the existing mechanisms? What are the government's strategy to save vultures at this moment? If you see the population, we have seen a decline, severe decline, as Dr. Vibhu Prakash mentioned. From the crores, the population declined to thousands. But now we are seeing an upward movement, upward trend in the population. In certain pockets, the populations are doing in situ very well. So the population is showing a very positive sign, number one. Number two, if you see the government of India's approach to vulture conservation, ex-situ through CZA, the vulture conservation is on priority. Similarly, for in-situ conservation also, under integrated development of wildlife habitat program of Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change, the vulture conservation is also listed among the top 20 endangered species, and that is getting a priority. So I think, in my personal opinion, this is not the right stage to create a separate authority for conservation of vultures in India. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sirs, and it was fantastic and wonderful to have all of you. All our registered participants get a copy of your presentations, and we will handhold and continue to take your guidance for the next coming months, and expect and seek your help for guiding us further. So thank you so much, and with this we end this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Dr. Vibhu Prakash. We'll be looking forward for further.
Thank you, and the team in Team Mysuru and the CZA team, they are thanked for all the wonderful support today. Thank you.